The old marble pillars of the Fulton City Courthouse seemed to press down on the room, trapping the warm, heavy air. Rows of spectators leaned forward in their seats, whispering and trading glances as the scene unfolded at the front. Beside the defendant's table stood a young man who seemed too small for the space around him. His shoulders were squared, his hands resting casually in his pockets, his chin tilted in quiet defiance. This was Elias Monroe, 21 years old, facing charges of armed robbery and evading police. To most in the room, his future looked bleak. But the way Judge Harold Linton gazed down at him made it clear. This was about more than guilt or innocence. Linton sat back in his oversized leather chair, tapping the polished wood of his bench with 2 fingers. The corners of his mouth curled upward into something between a smirk and a dismissal. "Son," he said, voice tinged with condescension, "you think you're some kind of legal hotshot? This isn't a college debate team. A couple of people," chuckled one of the clerks, even the bailiff. The prosecutor grinned openly. Elias didn't smile. He'd been preparing for years, not for this exact moment, but for any moment when he'd have to navigate a courtroom. While other kids were memorizing sports stats, he was poring over legal textbooks. His father, a former defense investigator, had left lying around. He'd grown up surrounded by case files and stories about how the system really worked, how corners got cut, how truth could be buried under procedure. By the time Elias turned 17, he could dismantle a case argument better than most second-year law students. But Judge Linton didn't see any of that. He only saw another defendant about to waste the court's time. "Let's get this over with," Linton muttered, flipping open the case file. "I've got a lunch reservation." The gallery laughed lightly. The prosecutor, Victoria Klein, stood. She moved with the ease of someone convinced she'd already won. Her gray suit was crisp, her tone smooth as she laid out the charges. "Your Honor, the state will demonstrate that Elias Monroe was apprehended minutes after a corner store robbery, matching witness descriptions with fingerprints on the stolen merchandise. The facts are simple, the evidence overwhelming." It sounded airtight. Judge Linton nodded toward Elias. "Defense?" Elias glanced at his public defender, a man who'd barely glanced up from his notepad all morning. Then Elias placed a hand on his arm, a quiet signal to sit down. "I'll be representing myself," Elias said evenly. The room went still. A couple of eyebrows shot up. Klein let out a short laugh. "This ought to be good," she muttered. Elias took a slow step toward the center of the room, letting the silence work for him. "Your Honor," he began, "before we dive in, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Klein crossed her arms. "Go ahead." "You're claiming Officer Barrett personally saw me leaving the scene?" "That's correct." "And his written report states that as fact?" "It does," she said, sounding impatient. Elias nodded slightly. "Then I move to have that testimony dismissed." Judge Linton raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "Because Officer Barrett wasn't within 6 blocks of the store when the robbery occurred," Elias said simply. "The city patrol logs will confirm it." A faint crease formed on Klein's forehead. "If we check his GPS data," Elias continued, "we'll see his car was parked outside a diner, not the scene. Which means his testimony isn't just mistaken, it's impossible." The gallery stirred. Klein straightened, her voice tightening. "Your Honor, this is the word of a defendant against a sworn officer. Exactly why we should verify the logs," Elias interrupted. "If I'm wrong, we'll know in minutes. If I'm right—" He let the sentence trail off. Linton studied him for a moment. "Prosecution, any objection to pulling the GPS records?" Klein hesitated just long, enough for the room to notice. "No objection," she said finally. The energy shifted. While the clerk made arrangements, Klein pressed on, mentioning the fingerprints found on a bag of stolen cash. Elias nodded calmly. "Yes, my prints were there. Because I touched the bag hours earlier, when it was sitting on the counter in plain sight while I was paying for groceries." just like you've touched 100 items that later passed through other people's hands. Touching isn't stealing. He turned to the jury, voice steady. If contact equals guilt, then every one of you could be a criminal right now. A couple of jurors glanced at each other. Elias wasn't done. And the fingerprint analyst? Not here today, which means I can't question the chain of custody or the accuracy of the match. You're being asked to take that on faith. Linton exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Then Elias dropped the final blow. He produced a signed statement from the store owner, the man who had been robbed. In it, the owner clearly said the suspect he saw was a light-skinned man with a beard, wearing a baseball cap. Elias gestured to his own clean-shaven face. Does that sound like me? The room erupted in whispers. Klein's shoulders tensed. Your Honor, no, Elias said firmly. This is relevant. This is the description given the night of the incident, buried in a report the state conveniently ignored. I was arrested not because I matched the description, but because I happened to be walking home nearby. Judge Linton stared at him for a long time, the smirk gone. Prosecution? Klein's voice was flat. No further questions. Linton's gaze swept the courtroom before he finally spoke. Case dismissed. The gallery buzzed with disbelief. Elias stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the decision settle. As he turned to leave, Linton called out, Mr. Monroe, ever think about law school? Elias didn't answer. He just smiled faintly. Outside, the courthouse steps swarmed with reporters shouting questions. Elias ignored them, heading straight for his mother, who stood at the curb, arms crossed. You nearly gave me a heart attack, she said, pulling him into a hug. Sometimes you have to take a risk, he replied. Across the street, Judge Linton stood by his car watching. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by something heavier, reflection. He hadn't expected to remember this case, but he would, because Elias Monroe had done the unthinkable. He'd made the system look at itself, and for once it had blinked first.